The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Jillian Schaefer and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, HCM 101, What is it, Who needs it, and Why it's important, presented by Nathan Triplett of SWK Technologies. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise down. However, you can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar. To submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this presentation and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees as well as to those who registered but were not able to attend. Please take a moment at the end of the presentation to answer our one survey question. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend our webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you software and industry knowledge, tools, and support whenever you need it. So whether you're here doing research for a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels, so we encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Nathan.
Very good. Thank you, Jolene. And again, thanks to everybody for attending today. Let me get my PowerPoint up on the screen here. So as Jolene mentioned, we're going to be going through HCM 101. What is it? Who needs it? And why is it important? My name is Nathan Triplett. I lead our HCM sales practice here at SWK. That picture is a little dated, but we won't dwell on that. So our agenda first, we're just going to talk a little bit about what is HCM. So we'll get an idea of what are the different components involved. I think some of you probably have a pretty good understanding here, but want to make sure we kind of understand before we get into who needs it, all the different components that are out there that we think of when we think of HCM technology. When we think about who needs it, there's going to be different things, based on industry or size that come into play. So we'll kind of talk through the different factors when we're working with our customers that we encourage them to consider when deciding not only do you need an HCM technology, but what pieces are going to be most applicable to you. And then why is it important? We're going to sprinkle in things throughout that are going to share why we feel some of these components are important to different businesses, but we'll also provide a summary at the end, just the high level of why we think this technology can help and support your business. Then to kind of close things out before questions, I'm going to go through just the HR and payroll solutions that we support. Expect some of you here to learn a little bit more. I want to give you at least a 30,000-foot view in terms of the options that we have within our portfolio, as some of those choices and the things that we'll go through today may be applicable to you. As I mentioned, questions at the end. Jolene mentioned that we have a chat box open and available. If questions come up, please feel free to use it during the course of the presentation. Jolene's flagging, I can answer them on the way, and certainly we can do a consolidated question and answer at the end. So without further ado, we'll get into an overview of HCM. So, oops, maybe not, sorry about that. So thinking about HR technology, we think about really the entire employee life cycle. And in its simplest, explanation, it is taking all the things that are in paper that you use to manage employee data and making them electronic and putting them in a place where they are retrievable electronically. So thinking of the employee life cycle, I like to start with the wheel at the top. At the very beginning of that life cycle with recruiting management. So when we think of HR technology around recruiting, we think of the ability to create requisitions, to save language from different requisitions, to post those requisitions to different sites like Monster, Career Builder, Indeed, LinkedIn, to allow employees to apply, to weight certain questions, to automatically maybe not knock out, but see who of the 100 people that applied for a job based on the criteria you select, you should be talking to first, to go through, to capture interview questions, to make sure there's consistency with the questions that your hiring managers are asking, all the way to the point where we're saying, yes, let's extend an offer letter, let's get alignment from our leadership, from the finance team that we're within the wage range for this particular role, get the offer letter out to the employee and let them sign it electronically. So when we think of HR technology around recruiting, that's how we think of it. Moving along to workforce management, to me, this is really the filing cabinet that you have, that, maybe the employee handbook and W-4 and I-9 and, social media policy, the cell phone policy, all of those documents, anything that you need to capture around an employee's information, their profile, we want to find a way to manage that electronically. So it starts with onboarding, post-hire, if we have any transfers within departments, any pay increases, any write-ups. When we think of workforce management, it's the ability to electronically capture that data and route that data effectively without HR having to do a bunch of data entry, and then obviously make it easily retrievable along the way. Performance management, continuing to move clockwise around the wheel, is something that we see coming up more and more and really changing. I think your typical performance appraisals where your 30, 60, 90-day reviews, maybe the annual self-review, manager review, maybe you get a merit increase based on that, maybe you don't. But we see that shifting a little bit within the marketplace to more of an ongoing performance review where you have maybe quarterly goals, but weekly check-ins. So instead of waiting, a whole year to say, what are the things that happened in the last 365 days with a particular employee, we're doing that on a weekly basis. We're aligning it to goals, which are, both departmental and organizational. So within HR technology, we see both ways to use the, I won't call it older way, but the more typical structured performance appraisal, as well as some of the new continuous performance management tools, and incorporate that into the overall employee profile and company strategy around managing that data. Compensation and benefits. This kind of goes with onboarding a little bit with benefit management. The ability to allow employees to go online to see the benefit options available to them, to appropriately display them based on their particular role and their tenure within the organization, allow them to elect those benefits, see their contributions and the employer contributions towards their plan, and then pass that over to not only HR, to the benefit broker, and then to payroll. So we have all the appropriate employer deductions reflected on that employee's paycheck. So really it's the tools and the technology that we use to manage that, as well as compensation, which can tie into performance as well, right? Do you have a Likert scale associated with your performance appraisal that's going to automatically designate some sort of merit increase? Are we paying for performance? Those are things that we can tie together with technology rather than doing that outside the system. Continuing to move down, learning management, again, something that we're seeing more and more of in the marketplace today, especially in the time of COVID, when we have some employers that have disruptions, maybe not as busy as we typically are. So, what are we doing to grow those employees, to help them satisfy, different needs or more needs within the business? Or as the goals and the priorities of the focus of companies change, right? How do we continue to not only hire folks, but up-level the folks that we have within our organization to fill those evolving needs within the business? So giving the tools that allow you to create different courses, different curriculum, allow employees to go in, to watch videos, to take tests, to measure engagement, to measure test scores, to be able to give them a path to get to where not only they want to go, but you would like them to go, is something we see with learning management. Attendance and payroll management is a pretty big one. So if you look, between attendance and payroll management and workforce management, I think those are the three pillars of an HR system, right? To me, it's what's the single truth for your employee data, your employee information. That's what lives in workforce management. And how do we effectively use that to feed it up to time so employees can clock in, clock out, we can get the appropriate approval on that particular employee record. And then when it's time to push that data into payroll, how do we get that approved into payroll effectively and appropriately and accurately? So from a payroll processing perspective, we're not chasing down time cards, we're not chasing down approvals, we're not fixing missed punches. We are processing payroll and managing the exceptions as they are true exceptions that come up, not things around a missing time card. So payroll tends to be a very big thing within HCM because everybody needs that, but time management, a critical one as well. Continuing up, we think about exit management, right? At the other end of the employee life cycle, as we have employees, they have good terminations, we have retirements, we have folks that we need to move out of the business, maybe for cultural reasons. How do we do that effectively seamlessly and with as little manual process as possible, and to create a really good experience, or as good a possible experience as we can for the employee. So the tools to be able to manage that data, to manage the communications, the COBRA notifications, to update different departments that maybe need to inactivate those employees from an IT perspective, for example, with an Active Directory or another system that we don't want those employees to have access to post-hire, post-employment. All things that we think about when we think about HR technology around exit management. And then last but certainly not least, compliance management. We live in a world and an age in the HR payroll land where it doesn't seem to be getting any easier for us to stay compliant and to understand everything that's happening with the executive orders, things around the CARES Act, the PPP, less recently around the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, and what we need to do to populate the 1094s, 1095s, aggregate data from HR with benefit data, time data, as well as payroll data to appropriately do that. There's the ability to have technology that can support those processes, streamline the flow of data, and help to mitigate what can be really significant risks around compliance. It really always has been a key driver and continues to be more and more of one as organizations kind of look at what is HCM and how can it help me be successful. So before we get into kind of who needs it, what I like to do, especially now that we've identified kind of the wheel of what's involved, is I advise folks to gain internal alignment. It's really important to have alignment and define balance between your short and long-term goals. Because if you don't define your hurdles, first and foremost, measuring success, both internally and for us as a provider, or whatever provider you're working with, becomes a significant challenge, right? Success for us isn't installing software. Success for us is meeting your goals, right? Alleviating pain, eliminating challenges, and allowing you to be successful both in the short and the long term. But as you look at these, we have a lot of customers that tend to focus on their daily hurdles, right? What's immediately in front of them. And if we only do that when we're looking at technology, we're neglecting our long-term strategy. On the flip side of that, if we only focus on those strategic items as we think about systems and technology, the daily tasks are going to continue to create problems. They drain resources, they drive disengagement, and they can ultimately get in the way of your organization from, achieving those strategic goals. So it's finding that right balance internally and gaining alignment internally is what I advise all of our customers to do, because that's the path to success for these systems. So when you look at some examples of daily hurdles, right, the lack of time control for employees tends to be one of the biggest ones. Who clocked in? Did they clock in on time? Did they miss punches? Was it approved? How am I controlling breaks? How am I controlling overtime? Additional pay types, time off requests tends to be a big challenge, right? And that the immediate transaction affects everybody because all employees in some way or another are managing their time data. So just some examples of a daily hurdle there. Compliance tracking, we talked about the ability to easily extract information out of the system we need to, and just reporting in general. And my philosophy on an effective HR system, and this doesn't need to be multiple modules, a system could just be a payroll application, but can you get the information in seamlessly and effectively, and then can you get the data out seamlessly and effectively and to the people that need to consume it and act on it quickly. Other thing we see, we have a lot of Sage 100 users on the conversation today, right? Just the ability to effectively get a payroll file over to the general ledger and not have to do any Excel gymnastics or a bunch of data entry in order to have that effectively posting. And then, some strategic initiatives that we see, aligning to modern talent demands. How do we find the best talent? How do we retain our top talent? What are the best sources for us to do that? It's that question. Out of those 100 applicants, who are the 10 I should focus on first? Or if I need 100 and I only have 10, right? How do I extend that applicant pool to get people that are really going to help to drive our business forward? I always have believed that, we're employee-driven businesses. It's all about hiring and getting good people and keeping good people and using their experience to attract more. And that's part of cultivating the employee experience, something that's become more and more difficult in the world of COVID. We talk a lot. I have, breakout meetings with, smaller groups of our customers, and something, I think I've done 4 or 5 of them so far. Something that's come up in every single one is, how do we maintain, or how do you maintain your culture when we're not, in the cubicle next to you, or in the same office, or having that break room or water cooler conversation. So there's things that, we think about from a technology perspective around communicating, creating maybe something with employee self-service that's getting information out to employees, that's, measuring employee engagement, which happened to take an employee engagement survey for SWK this morning. So all of those things we tend to think about from a strategic perspective. Then using that data for planning, right? We took the employee engagement survey, we'll have a manager meeting, and we'll understand, how do we do versus last year? What are the areas that we need to focus on within the business? And something else that you can tend to get from it is, how do we compare to other organizations in terms of the scores that we have? And then finally, a strategic initiative I see is optimizing HCM investments. I often work with customers that have a number of different systems that have different levels of communication, and mostly none between them. So we have one approach for, here's how we post requisitions to LinkedIn and Craigslist. Then we go through onboarding, which is done via SharePoint. Then we do our benefits enrollment, which is done through PlanSource, which our benefit provider gives to us. HR is in spreadsheets and paper. And then we have payroll in our payroll system. We've got a time system, which is older and disconnected. Our performance management is also done with SharePoint, but doesn't necessarily connect with our HR and onboarding data. And then for learning management, we use LinkedIn for that. And so a lot of what we do is, help organizations take all of those pieces and say, how do we either effectively connect them, or present something that is going to give that single point of entry and eliminate some of the juggling of data that we find many HR organizations are having to do today. So we know what it is. We kind of given a sense of what the approach to take. We think about who needs it, right? And I like to start with payroll. I like the fun guy, have a little picture here. I do payroll. You should be nice to me. I always think that's an important reminder for folks. But it really, to me, starts with payroll, because everybody needs that. Everybody does not need HCM technology and all the pieces that I've talked about and I'm going to continue to talk about today. But we do find that in order to be in business, to have employees, to keep employees, we need to pay them. So one of the reasons that later in the presentation, I'm going to be going through some of the payroll options, just because it's so foundational. And then as you think of needing other pieces or connecting other pieces, determining our strategy with payroll often determines our strategy with some of those other components as well. But when I think of who needs HCM, one of the bigger things I think of is the size of the organization. So if the bigger an organization that we have, the more employees, more data, more compliance, more complexity, and it's hard, but it's not impossible, but it's hard to manage without technology. Things that larger organizations need to do, succession planning, career development, career paths, pay equity, pay for performance, just hiring and onboarding, and everything that you need to do to capture data and share it with other people and pieces of the business gets more difficult as you get larger as an organization. Beyond that, there are compliance implications, as I've listed down here below. So when I think of technology that's needed beyond payroll, it's not an ultimate, but 20 employees tends to be around the size where maybe that's something we should start thinking about. And there's also things from a compliance perspective. ADEA comes into play, COBRA comes into play with 20 employees. You get upwards of 50, that's where the question for me really becomes impactful. ACA has driven a lot of that. FMLA tracking can be difficult without systems. AAP is something else. Easy to generate those reports if we're effectively managing data and HR technology. And then once we're over 100 employees, especially at a multi-location organization, really it becomes critical. There's additional compliance items that come in. So really, any organizations that are of that size that don't have much beyond payroll from an electronic perspective to help them manage employee data, something I really encourage you to take a closer look at. Geography is another area that tends to be a pretty big factor of, do I need HCM technology? Where you are matters. There's different regulations for different areas. The Department of Labor in California and Oregon, for example, out west, has very different requirements. They're stringent in terms of time, in terms of breaks, how overtime is calculated, pretty significant implications there. And then if you look on the right, I'm based in the great state of Ohio here, under about 8 inches of snow, but we're also under quite a bit of different payroll taxes. So we've got our federal, our state, our local, our school district taxes. Some areas, your Floridas and your Texases of the world don't have the state income tax of the localities. But something important to know, not only if you're doing business in those states, but if you're considering doing business in those states, that it can be more difficult, especially from a payroll perspective. And then we work with a lot with, construction companies, service-based companies that, will do government work. Prevailing wage is managed differently in different areas of the company. Sometimes it's a federal standard. Some states have their own standards. So understanding where you are, where you have locations or a physical presence with employees, and all the different specific regional compliances that come into play tends to be very important when we think about not only the benefit technology, but the risks that we can mitigate. Industry is something else we see being a big factor here. I have a couple examples on the board that we'll call out some specific things, but really every industry has their unique approaches. It impacts both what needs to be tracked, what's needed, as well as maybe some interfaces or integrations that are appropriate. So on the top, I have an example of food service, or a picture of food service. In that industry, we tend to see integrations with other systems like a point of sale or a back office system being critical, because they're sharing employee data, or employees are using that to clock in and out on a day-to-day basis. Food service or quick service type environments tend to be higher turnover, with 50 or 100% turnover. And so the ability to effectively recruit and onboard and offboard employees and all of that data tends to be even more critical, especially since we're sharing it with multiple systems. And then you have your training and certifications that are necessary, your food safety training, your tip certification if you're an alcohol serving business. So different things that we need to track and maintain compliance around. Where if you go to the bottom left, we have healthcare. Instead of a point of sale, we're integrating with an EMR system typically. Credentialing is important, as it is in a lot of businesses, but even more so in healthcare, where if you have a nurse or a doctor that does not have their certifications up to date and they are serving and assisting patients, pretty significant concerns and compliance components in there, not only within helping, but even being able to schedule them. And to that effect, scheduling in those environments tends to be pretty impactful. So we're scheduling to a budget or scheduling to a capacity with headcounts. So again, industry-specific things, but I think if we kind of look at different organizations that are out there, there's definitely carryover between these. And then finally, manufacturing, a big part of our customer base here at SWK. Within manufacturing, we see different things. We see the need for integration with ERP for costing purposes, right? Have employees track time against jobs or projects or work orders or service tickets. We see different needs around time capture. Do you need geofencing? Do you need geolocations, right? Do I want to prevent employees from clocking in, or do I want to know where they are when they're clocking in? Do you need crew punching? Attendance tracking in those types of environments tends to be more important, where we're rewarding for perfect attendance and making sure people are showing up on time, rounding punches, making sure people aren't clocking in early every day, incurring additional wages based on that. OSHA tracking tends to be very important in those environments, or any kind of environment where it's higher risk for incident. So to be able to track the incident, all the items around it, up to the workers' comp claim, and generating our 300 reports right out of the system are benefits that we see for our manufacturers. And then, more frequently, or more recently, I should say, touchless time entry, right? In the world of COVID, biometric clocks used to be the rage. I've not sold a biometric clock this year, believe it or not, because we don't like things where employees are all touching the same thing. It's hard to keep those devices clean. So the ability to get in, clock in safely into the workforce and track that time is something that we've seen become much more prevalent in the last year or so. Another factor of who needs it is the company culture, right? There's different approaches to culture and what technology or what role technology plays in that. And so one of the questions I tend to ask the leaders within an organization, right, or what are our goals around culture? There's many HCM solutions that offer a social aspect and self-service. Something like employee referrals, the ability to track and be rewarded as an employee for referring other good employees or friends, right, of yours, or talented folks that you know in your network into the business to help build the culture, something we see pretty frequently. And that giving access to employees into key and critical information so they can update, they can have control over the data, they can use it to make decisions without having to go to HR or to payroll or finance or wherever it may be, especially critical in a remote working environment, which more and more of us are being thrust into all the time. We often see cultures of growth and learning, where some organizations we're hiring into a role, we're training for that role, they're focused on that, and that's completely fine. Whereas other organizations, we want to continue to grow, like that ongoing growth and development of employees to give them different career paths. If that's something that's important, there are definitely components within HCM that are going to be important to organizations. I mentioned before ongoing performance assessments. The same thing, right? That culture of growth and learning, and to be able to set goals, to measure goals, and effectively report on that across the organization and see how we can use that data to drive culture. Where are we lacking? Where are we liked in terms of achievement or in terms of talent in particular divisions or departments? And then I mentioned it on the onset, employee engagement is a huge topic within HR technology today and has been for the last 3 years. A tremendous amount of data and science around the value of engagement. So many solutions offer embedded or integrated tools to help measure and drive engagement. And again, compare to other folks, because you may do a survey yourself and say, hey, I've got a Likert scale of 5, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We send it out. Everybody responds, and we ask the question, do you have the tools and the resources that you need to be successful? You get 4.5 out of 5. You're celebrating at 90%, B+ or A-, depending on how you want to think of it. Well, maybe that for your industry in your region, you're in the 50th percentile of all companies that have been surveyed. So not only understanding how do your employees feel, but what does that mean and how does that compare to the other organizations in my area to really get a true litmus test of how we're doing in our level of engagement within a business. And it tends to be a driver for some organizations. The next item that I see very often within the customers that are especially on the cusp of do I need this technology or not is, do you have the internal expertise in bandwidth? I love this picture with the sticky notes. I've got 3 young kids, 2 of them are in grade school. We're trying to homeschool right now, and this is how we feel often, trying to juggle all the different logins and things along those lines, which, by the way, is not our expertise. And so sometimes this can work, sometimes it does not. We often work with folks that are HR professional, right? They're the payroll professional, but by trade, they're controller or bookkeeper or some sort of accounting role, right? Where they're trying to backfill payroll and backfill HR. So what we often do is just do an opportunity cost assessment of, what are the other things that we can do? What's our potential risk and exposure? Oftentimes this will land around payroll. And one of the questions I'm asked by a lot of customers is, should I keep payroll in-house or should I outsource payroll? This is a graphic from ADP. I think it's pretty indicative of most outsourced providers. So if you look at the typical in-house payroll tasks, all of these aren't going to be applicable to every single organization out there. But on the whole, most of these tasks are things that our employers that we work with need to do if you process payroll in-house. Where if you outsource payroll, if you look at kind of what shifts from white to gray, you can take a lot of that responsibility off your hands. Now, some conversations I have, I'll talk with folks and they'll say, that stuff's easy, right? I've got it. We've done it for 15 or 20 years. right? Even though I would kind of see them as a more complex or larger organization, their perspective is they'd rather have that control, and it's something that's easily manageable, while other organizations just do not want to touch any of it, right? It's just out of sight, out of mind, want to offset, the risk and the compliance associated with all of the different taxation reporting that goes along with it. And so a conversation that we often have, right, and looking at what are the resources, what is the expertise, what's the level of control that you look for, what's your risk tolerance, to determine, what's the best path forward in terms of technology for your business. Growth or turnover, another key area that I see being a driver of, is HR technology needed or not? It's similar to size of a business. It's more turnover or more growth. It means more requisitions, it means more hiring, more onboarding, more goal creation, more payroll and termination checks, more succession planning, more cultural and engagement concerns as we're turning over employees. So there's just complexity that comes along with it. And I tend to put the benchmark at around 10 or 15 employees per year. If you're hiring or bringing that number of folks within the business, there's a good possibility that some level of HR technology can benefit your organization. Compliance requirements is something, we talked a little bit about how these will differ regionally, but there's also some very industry specific compliance requirements where you have your ISO certifications for manufacturers, your TIP certification for food service. HIPAA is on here. That's a big one right now with COVID and the world of COVID. And you look at different forums and what different HR professionals think. There's still a question, what should you and should you not disclose? And so, we looked before as well as ACA and the EEO reporting. How I advise my customers here, we don't like to look at fear, but it's really important to understand based on your business, the size of your business, your industry, your location, right? All the specifics of what you do, what's your potential exposure? Because when we talk about compliance infractions from an HR payroll perspective, it can vary pretty wildly from hundreds of dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars. All right, and I'm sure a quick Google search can show you examples of both. So we really just like to work with organizations, get a good understanding of first the demographic, and then understand any potential risk and exposure and strategize effectively from there. The final thing I think of when I think who needs HCM is the company vision and priorities. This goes somewhat along with culture, but I think about it just a little bit differently. When I think about company vision and priorities and how I would consult the organizations that I work with, the questions I ask, does your organization have goals around growth? And do you have, if so, great, and do you have the infrastructure and the people to support that growth, right? To support the requisition, the onboarding, and the training of those employees. You have goals around employee development. Do you have the tools that you need to support this? Do you have goals around employee engagement? If so, great. How do you measure it? How do you measure it effectively and accurately and know that goal is being met? And do you have goals around retention? How are you driving this? How are you measuring this? Are you retaining your best employees, and how do you know that or know that you're not? And so really understanding and aligning those visions and priorities with the technology is something I always tend to go back to when I just think it's absolutely critical for businesses. So we talked about what it is, who needs it. Just, we've talked a little bit about why it's important. This is something I pulled from a SHRM publication that I think resonates pretty well with me and what I would advise customers. The first and foremost is to streamline your HR process and remove that administrative burden. It's more data, is more work, more data entry. I often work with employers, I would say more often than not, where if you talk about an employee record, that employee data lives at least 6 different places. And so our opportunity for error, just a level of redundancy, and the number of HR professionals that I know that spend more than 50% of their day-to-day activities doing data entry, is significant, and something that systems like, with HCM technology, it can help, right? It can help streamline those processes and get that single employee record or single truth for employee information. And by doing that, we reduce HR administration and compliance costs, right? With compliance, is it easy to generate those reports? So 300 logs, the EEO reports, your affirmative action reporting, your ACA reports. How much time does it take you to do that? But then what's your exposure if you're not doing it correctly? So things that we really think about there. It allows you to compete more effectively for talent. Again, we're a people-driven world, or people-driven companies. The better talent you have, the more successful you're going to be as an organization. Do you have the tools that you need to effectively source them? Improving service and access to data for employees and managers. Again, this was critical before. It's always good to have employees, to the level they can, have access to their information, their pay information, the demographic information. But in a world of COVID where we're decentralized, we can't walk down the hallway to the next office, knock on the door, and get the piece of information that we need. Really nice to be able to access that data from anywhere. The next thing here is provide real-time metrics. So spot trends to make decisions. And again, it comes down to effectively getting the data into these systems and then getting the data out and determining where do we have risks, where do we have areas of concerns, right? If we look at our employee engagement surveys, maybe 6 of our departments are scoring, 80, 90%, and one of them's in the 40 percentile. How do we figure that out? How do we drill into that? How do we support the leaders within those departments based on the responses that we're getting to the survey to make that department, that leader, and those employees more effective and in alignment with our overall organizational strategy? And then all of that in summation, really, it allows HR to be more strategic within a business, just a seat at the table, to be able to, when companies are making decisions or setting goals or looking at future priorities, understanding how is the technology, how are our people, how are our resources aligned with the goals and the activities that we are setting out and setting as the standard for our business moving forward. So again, I believe very firmly in revisiting this alignment conversation for the folks that I work with, customers I work with. It's ongoing, because I think these things are so critical, because I like our projects to be successful. I like our customers to be successful and to spend their money and resources wisely. And if we're not aligned, not only between ourselves and the customer, but internally, the chance for success, it's pretty significantly impacted. So just like to revisit this, re-emphasize it, because it's, especially thinking of a presentation like this, it's always interesting to kind of look at, oh, was this factor applicable for us? Is this good? Is this great? But the bigger picture of taking all those things together and lining them all up and getting all the decision makers and the different people that are going to be impacted and deciding together what's the most important thing for today and tomorrow and that we should focus on right away is, to me, even more critical than the solutions that you pick to use sometimes. So briefly, given the importance of payroll and driving this process and the fact that everyone in this call is doing it in some way, I'd like to at least highlight the options that we support here at SWK. So we do have 5 options. 2 of them are KRONOS based, really most importantly for strategic integrations there. Sage 100 Payroll has been around for 30 years. We have hundreds of customers on that platform. Sage HRMS, very similar, hundreds of customers on that platform, has a payroll and full HCM. And we've been an ADP partner for about a year now. So just kind of want to highlight briefly each of these options and where we kind of see it fitting within our customer base. So Sage 100 Payroll, it was recently updated to framework within Sage 100. So you Sage 100 users will know it's now in the Business Objects framework, which allows a lot more flexibility with printing and overall usability of that particular module. It added some stuff around ACA. Where I see it targeted is really for the customers around that 50 employee range. It is a payroll module. I call it an accounting-based payroll. It has some HR functionality. We can also extend some of the functionality from Sage HRMS with their HR module and employee self-service to it. But really at its core, standing by itself, it's designed to be a payroll solution for somewhat of a smaller organization. We have much larger companies using Sage 100 Payroll up in the thousands, but in terms of where I see the design and the functionality based on the market, it tends to be that 50 or 150 and below, or maybe even 100 and below, understanding what other HR functionality may be needed. And I have some additional information. I'll send this slide deck out to the group here, so don't feel the need to scribble down the email address here for you Sage 100 Payroll users. The next kind of option that we have is Sage HRMS Payroll. Both Sage 100 and HRMS are on-prem payroll options. Those are the two on-prem solutions that we offer. Sage HRMS Payroll tends to be more important or more applicable when we have larger organizations. I tend to say over 50, over 100, this becomes more applicable, and also when we have complexity. So we're managing a lot of garnishments. We're doing a lot of effective dating with changes with our HR and payroll database. We need to manage arrearages or deductions in arrears. We have advanced allocations where they're variable or split. We need to do cost center overrides. So it's a more sophisticated payroll module, and also comes integrated with the full HCM suite where we have applicant tracking, onboarding, time, benefits, performance learning, etc. Whereas Sage 100, it has some functionality that we can interface with this HRMS, but it's more standalone. KRONOS, we have partnered with KRONOS because we found it's good for those customers that were on one of our Sage products that were looking to move to a SaaS environment, something that I'm sure you know many customers are doing these days. We found it was a very natural step. It was something we could take ownership of. It was a strong time system, which again, we heard the importance I have around that time management. So time, HR, and payroll, all those pieces were very strong. The single database application. And then from a payroll perspective, you can completely outsource payroll. And this option actually gives you the flexibility to manage some of your taxation in-house as well. So this is an option that we do have. One differentiator between KRONOS and ADP is ADP requires payroll. KRONOS, you can just purchase their time or recruiting, HR, etc., as a standalone function. And then ADP, we went into the relationship about a year ago. They're obviously a market leader for payroll and HCM. We're close in proximity. We know a lot of our customers are using it. And we've seen a really good shift from ADP in the last 5 years where they're more focused around the marketplace. Really good when we're looking at best in breed options, as they have, I think, a couple hundred different direct integrations with products, for recruiting and onboarding if you don't want to use their core technology. Also a lot of strong offerings outside of the technology with 401k services, insurance, pay cards, background checks, etc. So it's been a nice addition to our portfolio. And for those customers who do want to go down this path, that allows us to be a party to the process and to be someone who can impact change, with a payroll or service issue should they come up. So the question I always get asked here is, which is the right one for me? And rather than saying I don't know, what we tend to do is just go through some different options. So we can do technology assessments because, quite frankly, I can make a case for every one of the payroll solutions that we have for some of our customers in our base, right? There are some customers where 100 payroll is the right option, where HRMS is the right option, where ADP is the right option, KRONOS or Scissortail. So being able to go through and kind of understand, what's our footprint today? What are the different areas we talked about? Our culture, our industry, our size, our internal expertise, our growth and turnover, our compliance requirements, our vision, taking all those things into account. And then based on that, lining up which ones could be a good fit. And then from there, solutions assessment, help to understand what's the technology look like? What's it look like when I push this button, right? Does this meet my needs? Not only from a functionality perspective, but from a budget and from a change management or implementation perspective. And then other things that we can do, we tend to avoid customizations, but those are things that we can do. If there's specific things that you need or specific integrations, This is where we do most of our customization work in integrating or interfacing data between systems. If that's strategic, those are ways that we can help both with our infrastructure and the existing infrastructure that you have. So that is the content I have for today. I hope it was helpful and informative, certainly available and open to ask questions now. We'll see if any came through in the chat, and encourage you to enter them in or raise your hand if you have some.
Thank you, Nathan. We'll now open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar, and we'll give that a minute in case any additional come through. And just a reminder, everyone, we do have a subject matter expert here. This is a great opportunity to have your questions answered in real time. And it does look like there were a couple that came through during the presentation, Nathan. The first being, would an HCM solution be appropriate for a small business of 25 to 50 people?
Potentially, yes. So definitely from a payroll perspective, right, we need to process payroll. So it's something that we can go through it a little bit further now, but again, kind of depending on those different factors of your turnover, your industry, where you are, you're going to see different benefits of the different pieces, whether it's recruiting or onboarding or performance. For them, an employer that size, I typically don't see a full suite, right? Everything that we talked about today. But a lot of times outside of payroll, whether it's time management or doing ongoing performance, there's an area or two which can be a benefit.
Awesome. We have one more. Will the presentation be available afterwards? Yes, the recording will be sent out to all registrants and attendees by end of day tomorrow. That looks like all the questions we've had so far, so just give me a minute as I take back the screen control. Perfect. Thank you so much, Nathan, for your informative presentation and for taking the time to be here today. For more information on HCM, check out our website at swktech.com and click on Human Capital Management under the Services tab. Thank you everyone for attending our webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day.